Buzzfeed recently translated some of the blog posts that have been put on Huffington Post Arabic. Now, this is the Arabic version of their publication, which is supposed to resonate more with those living in the Middle Eastern region of the world. And although Huffington Post is known for its more liberal or progressive stance on issues with its English version, it turns out that the Arabic edition of their publication isn't as progressive, and as a result, they're catching quite a bit of heat because of it. Now, there were a number of so-called questionable blogs that were posted. One of them had to talk about the issue of selfies. We'll get into the details. In one article for the site, an Algerian columnist authored what was intended as an open letter to all the Islamic Ummah's youth, condemned the selfie as a symptom of the diseases and the viruses of the Western world. So people were really concerned about that because it's thought to be a post that kind of spreads this notion of extremist religion, and people are against it, understandably so. The blog, the author claimed, was designed as a call to stop adopting such sick behaviors that come to destroy our traditions and the basics of human cultural identity. Ariana Huffington has responded to some of this criticism, right? Because people are upset at the anti-gay blog posts that are being put up on the Arabic edition of Huffington Post. Now keep in mind, they're blog posts. They're not written as straight news, they're written as opinion. So that's a really important distinction to make. But here's what Ariana Huffington had to say about the Arabic edition of Huffington Post prior to its launch. She said, one of the reasons why we're going to be based in London and Istanbul is to make it clear avoiding any kind of censorship and control is absolutely key to our coverage. We will support contributors in every way. But what happens when the contributors go against liberal or progressive ideology? That's the question here. And so, of course, Huffington Post in general is catching a lot of heat because of these blog posts. But the question is, should they be catching heat? I mean, the United States is very different from a lot of Middle Eastern countries, very different from the Arab world. To hold the Arab world to the same standards as the United States might be considered unfair, but it does definitely lead to an interesting conversation about what should and shouldn't stand on a forum like Huffington Post. What are your thoughts?
I think a lot of this has to do with expectations and a media outlet's tone and voice and stated mission. So when it comes to Huffington Post, I think it's a little vague and nebulous exactly where they stand on the spectrum. I think it would be more clear if we were talking about, you know, a Fox News versus an MSNBC or something of that nature, if we're talking about the traditional broadcast world. Huffington Post, though, generally airs on the side of progressive politics. And while Ariana was very clear that they were not going to censor, and these are opinion pieces, so I think that's a very important piece of information to consider, to contextualize this. I personally feel that I think it's important to always invite debate. The problem is, and I don't know, you need to do more research, was BuzzFeed intentionally trying to put HuffPo on blast because they are rival sites and competitors? Right.
I wouldn't be surprised if they did it because they're rival sites.
So look at who decided to, blow the whistle, which is I think is very important. I totally agree in checks and balances and media watchdogs amongst news outlets that we need that in order to keep, news truly authentic and genuine and competitive. But I'm sure the whole point is that they need to offer voices across the spectrum. And because the Middle East often voices of dissent are silenced, it's sorely needed. And so Huffington Post has the resources and the opportunity to give voice to a lot of oppressed minority groups in the Middle East where, these sort of dictatorships and regimes and religious extremists really silence them. So I think that's the sensitive piece of all of this, is that you really want Huffington Post to be able to take a bit of a stand and, again, offer a voice to both sides of the debate.
I think what you're saying is absolutely fair, because the reality is Huffington Post, at least the English version, might have a particular political stance. But there have been multiple times where I've read blog posts from people that I disagree with, people who aren't necessarily very progressive or very liberal, they're very right-wing, very conservative in their ideology, and they're able to post a blog sharing their opinion or their viewpoint to kind of broaden a discussion or a debate on the forum. And I think that that's totally okay, even if I disagree with them. Now, in the case of the Arabic version of Huffington Post, they took down the anti-gay post in question, and they actually replaced it with a message saying the following. The anti-gay blog was removed and replaced with the message, This blog should not have been published as it contradicts the Huffington Post's editorial positions and guidelines, which are based on encouraging positive dialogue and mutual respect. It has therefore been taken down. Now, if they took it down because they felt that it incited violence or disrespected a community, I am totally for it. But again, it's a delicate balance where you want to make sure that you do have some dissent on your forum. You don't want to censor contributors because they might have an ideology that disagrees with you. So I, of course, am very supportive of gay rights, and I won't agree with any type of blog post that wants to be intolerant of gay individuals. But at the same time, if there are people who are trying to make some sort of religious argument against it, I don't think that they should be stopped from necessarily writing it. If they're inciting violence, if they are causing actual harm to a community, they absolutely should be.
That's different.
You want it to be balanced. I guess that's the point that I'm trying to make. I don't think that Huffington Post is necessarily doing anything wrong here. They can't police every contribution that's being made on their site. However, if someone is doing something disrespectful or violent, then yeah, they should not only have their post taken down, they shouldn't be writing for the publication.